Hey guys, well, it's prelim final week in the AFL, but here we don't really care about that, so let's instead talk about round 6 of the AFLW season. But before we get into that, let's look at how my predictions went for round 5, and oh boy, I was not good this week. Mind you, I don't think anyone was when you have results like exactly the one we're going to talk about straight away, which is Sydney versus Collingwood. I had Sydney winning by 15, which, I thought I'd gone pretty low there. I thought Sydney wasn't going to win by much. Well, they didn't win at all because the Pies won by 26. How? Like, Sydney, how on earth do you, not kick a goal for, half the game when you were, kicking 100 against Gold Coast? Oh my goodness. And then, thankfully, Carlton, was looking like they might lose to Gold Coast, but thankfully got their act together and easily won by 46. And then, oh my goodness. I should have backed in my own side. Always feel so stupid when you tip against your own side when they win. So yeah, on me guys. I was too doomerish, but you know what? Good on Port for beating Melbourne. And then of course I had the Dogs winning by 20, and then GWS won by 20 because it turns out this time when I went to Manuka Oval, it was the Dogs who couldn't kick straight, and GWS is actually doing pretty good at kicking those goals.
Alright, hopefully Bulldogs to kick their first goal after kicking 5 behind. And it's another behind.
And then, if Collingwood beating City wasn't crazy enough, St Kilda finally decided to become good again after, 4 weeks and just destroy Essendon, who kicked 1 goal for the whole game. A team that, currently is 3-2 at the moment. Oh, wow, I am just in shock of how things are going. And obviously we have Geelong making easy work of Richmond. I feel so sorry for the Tigers. Going from a top 14 for most of last year's season to no wins is just, it might suck over there at the moment. But there might be a win coming. We'll talk about that in a sec. But anyway, let's go to Frankston, where Adelaide, I was almost right. I tipped them by 20 and they won by 21. I think the Hawks finally needed a reality check. You cannot win games kicking 4 goals non-stop, and eventually Adelaide found them out. Once again, North Melbourne apparently made history, becoming the first Premier to win the grand final rematch. To be honest, it wasn't really in doubt. North Melbourne's not losing a game this year. If they lost to Brisbane, that would have probably been a bigger upset than Collingwood beating Sydney, even though it was Brisbane. So let's put it that way. That's how dominant North Melbourne is. And then finally, I should have backed in history. Freo's never going to lose the Western Derby, are they? No matter how bad they are, no matter how good West Coast are, Freo's just going to find a way to win, obviously, aren't they? Anyway, let's get on to the actual games for this week, as I think you guys are more interested in. Without further ado, it's once again starting with Collingwood at Victoria Park. I swear they're getting all the home games at this point of the year. It's very weird. It feels like they're playing there three times out of 4. But regardless, they're playing Hawthorn this time, and it's interesting because, Collingwood's coming off a pretty amazing win, and Hawthorn's coming off a pretty disappointing loss. Could the Pies take off another team? If they can beat Sydney, they could potentially beat Hawthorn. And as we know from the semi-final last year, when you rattle a team like Hawthorn, they can actually crumble. So I think there is a chance the Pies can win, but I think the Sydney game was a bit of a fluke. So I'm actually I am going to back in the Hawks, but I'm only going to back in the Hawks to just win by about 5 this time. Next up, it's Port Adelaide versus Geelong. Once again, we got 2 games at Alberton in a row, which is very nice. The odds for this game were a little weird because on the fixture it had the betting odds towards Geelong, but on the tipping site it had the odds towards Port. I don't really know. Obviously, Geelong bet us 2 years ago, but you can't really take much of that. We had a very drastic change in our fortunes last year, so we are a very different team going into this year. Obviously, we had our big win against Melbourne last week, and you think Melbourne's a stronger team than Geelong, so you think you give us a better chance. Plus, we very much likely have Lauren Young joining the team this week, and possibly Janelle Cuthbertson, who could possibly help in really stopping us leaking these 40 points a game scores. So if we can keep Geelong, potentially to a lower score and, get our goals game, especially if Young can end up being an absolute star midfielder, I think we can win by, say, about 10. All right, North Melbourne versus Carlton. I think I'll skip over this one pretty quickly. Obviously, Carlton is doing pretty well, but this is North Melbourne we're talking about. So, look, I'm just going to say North Melbourne, let's just choose a random number by 53. The best thing I can do is how much can Carlton score? So I'll say, you know what, I'll say Carlton will somehow score over 20, but that's the only thing that's going to be impressive. North Melbourne's going to score something like 70 or so. But yeah, North Melbourne by 53. We'll just skip over this one. Sorry if you wanted me to talk about this one for a bit longer. But let's get to the next one. You know how I said Collingwood seems to always be playing at Victoria Park? I swear Fremantle's getting a ton of home games too. This time they're playing Essendon once again at Fremantle Community Bank Oval. Odds are for Fremantle this game. Last time these teams played, I think this was back when Essendon had that little bit of a horror start at the start of the year. But regardless, this is interesting because I don't know where to see Freo. They bet us in round one, sucked for ages, and then just randomly won the Derby. So it's left you very confused as to where they are as a team this year. At the same time, Essendon just had a horror game against St Kilda last week. So I guess that probably makes me feeling a bit more on the Fremantle bandwagon than the Bombers. Also, they're at home, although mind you, this is Fremantle like we're seeing this year and last year. They're actually pretty bad at home. So, but I think I'll stick back with Fremantle to win by 14. All right, now we have the Sydney Derby between Sydney and GWS. Generally, Sydney has had the chocolates when it comes to this game. I think GWS won the first one and Sydney's won the two afterwards. I think they're the only later expansion team to beat their older sister when it comes to these derbies. Actually, maybe Gold Coast might have won some against Brisbane. I don't remember. But regardless, yeah, I think Sydney is once again, they're in a much dominant position, even with their upset loss to Collingwood last week. I think they'll win pretty comfortably by something around about 25. They've just been the more dominant team this year, so I'm just going to back in the favourites. Then we get Melbourne versus West Coast. Once again, two solid teams coming off losses last week. Melbourne, I think, was a little bit unfortunate. Their accuracy in front of goals, had they been a bit more accurate, they would have obviously bet us. But, I can see West Coast potentially doing it. But obviously, it is a Melbourne home game. And I think Melbourne have been overall the stronger team. Obviously, they were coming into this, into last week undefeated. West Coast was not. And it's for that reason I think Melbourne's just going to have the edge over West Coast and win by 15. All right, next up we go to Mission Whitten Oval for the Bulldogs versus Brisbane. Obviously the Bulldogs are reeling from a very disappointing loss to GWS here in Canberra. But unfortunately I don't think they're going to find much salvation, even if at the home game, because they're up against Brisbane, who are just always a dominant team. I think Brisbane's going to easily make quick work of the Bulldogs regardless of any bounce back they show and win by, I think, a comfortable 38. Alright, St Kilda versus Richmond, and if we go by how St Kilda played in round 1 and 5, they're going to win this game easy, but then we remember they played in all those other rounds and were rubbish. So which St Kilda is going to show up? To be honest, I actually think it's going to be the bad St Kilda. I think Richmond, they are hungry for a win right now. They have gone through misery after misery in these first 5 rounds and are hungry for a win. And I think St Kilda just does not have the reliability. I don't think they're going to be that reliable team that took out Essendon. And for that reason, I think Richmond's going to, win by 13 and finally get their first win of the year. So fingers crossed, Richmond fans. I'm predicting you to win this week. I hope I'm not giving you false hope because, you do really want to see at least one win a year. No one wants to be that team that has no wins in a year. So, yeah, let's get back in the Tigers, everybody, and hope they can get a win. And sorry if you're a St Kilda fan. All right, finally up, we have Gold Coast versus Adelaide at People's First Stadium. Obviously, this is much like the Bulldogs game. Sure, the Gold Coast had that amazing win 2 weeks ago, and also they were kind of looking they were being Carlton for about a quarter last week. But, this is Adelaide we're talking about. They're a well-polished machine. I think they make quite easy work of Gold Coast, especially on their larger field at Carrara. I think it's going to be yet another bloodbath. Adelaide, I think, is going to win quite easily by, let's say, 45. All right, so looking back at the margins, I had the Hawks winning by 5, Port Adelaide by 10, North Melbourne by 53, Fremantle by 14, Sydney by 25, Melbourne by 15, Brisbane by 38, Richmond by 13, and Adelaide by 45. So come back next week to see how well I did with those predictions. Surely they have to be better than last week. And until next time, let's go Power.